When I was 7 years old, my grandfather took me up to a ridge behind our house, and he pointed down into the valley and he said, "Look at that." And I looked, and all I saw was trees and fog and the creek running through the bottom like a silver thread. And he said, "What do you see?" And I said, "I see trees, Papa." And he shook his head. He said, "No, you're looking but you're not seeing." And then he got down on one knee next to me, and he started pointing at things I hadn't noticed. He pointed at the way the fog was sitting in the low places but not the high ones. And he said that tells you where the cold air settles at night, which means that's where the frost will hit first in October, which means you never plant anything down there that can't survive a freeze. He pointed at a stand of hemlocks on the north face of the ridge, and he said, "Those trees are telling you which way the mountain faces, because hemlocks like shade and cool air, and they always grow on the north side." He pointed at a hawk circling above the tree line, and he said, "That hawk has been making the same circle for 20 minutes, which means there's something dead or dying in that field below him. And if it's a deer, we need to know about it, because a dead deer near the creek means the water downstream might not be safe to drink for a few days." He showed me all of that in about 5 minutes, standing on one ridge, looking at one valley, and I realized that my grandfather was not looking at the same world I was looking at. He was looking at a world that was alive with information. Every tree was a sentence, every bird was a word, every shift in the wind was a paragraph, and he could read all of it the way you'd read a book, because someone had taught him, and their someone had taught them, and it went back and back and back for more generations than anyone could count. Nobody taught you that. Nobody taught me that in school either. I learned it on that ridge, and on 100 ridges after it. I learned it from my grandfather, and my grandmother, and my father, and my uncles, and my aunts, and from the land itself. And what I want to talk to you about today is all the things that got passed down in these mountains for 200 years that never made it into a classroom. Truths about living and dying and working and loving and suffering and getting back up again that the modern world decided weren't important enough to teach. They were wrong. These truths are the most important things I know, and I'm going to share them with you today because somebody should have shared them with you a long time ago, and I'm sorry that nobody did. The first thing nobody taught you is how to be alone without being lonely. And I don't mean alone for an afternoon. I don't mean alone while your roommate is at work and you have the apartment to yourself for a few hours. I mean alone, really alone. The kind of alone where there is no other human voice within earshot, and no screen to reach for, and no notification coming to remind you that somebody, somewhere, knows you exist. The people in these mountains knew that kind of alone. They lived it, especially in winter. When the snow came in heavy and the roads closed and the hollows got cut off from each other for weeks at a time, you were alone with yourself whether you liked it or not. And that aloneness did something to people that I think was actually essential. It forced you to meet yourself. Not the version of yourself that you perform for other people. Not the version that knows the right things to say and wears the right expression. The real one. The quiet one underneath all of that. The one who sits there when everyone else has left the room. My grandmother spent entire weeks alone in the winter after my grandfather passed. She was in her 70s. No car, no phone for most of those years. Just her and the wood stove, and the chickens, and the dog, and whatever she had canned in the fall. And she told me once that those weeks were some of the most important weeks of her year. She said, "That's when I remember who I am. When there's nobody to talk to, I start talking to myself, and I find out what I actually think about things." She said, "Most people are afraid of that conversation. They'll do anything to avoid it. Turn on a radio, call somebody, find some noise to fill the space, because they're afraid of what they might hear if they actually listen to themselves." I think she was right. I think most people today have never been truly alone with themselves for more than a few minutes. And I think that's why so many people don't know who they are. They know who they are online. They know who they are at work. They know who they are around their friends, but they don't know who they are at 3 in the morning when the power goes out and the phone is dead and there's nothing but the sound of their own breathing and their own thoughts. That person is a stranger to them, and you cannot build a good life on a stranger's foundation. You need to know who you are when nobody is watching. The mountains taught us that. Nobody taught it to you. The second thing nobody taught you is how to need less. And I want to be clear about what I mean because this is not the same as being poor. We were poor by every measure the outside world uses. We didn't have money. We didn't have new things. We didn't have options the way people in cities had options. But needing less is not the same as having less. Having less is something that happens to you. Needing less is something you build inside yourself. It's a skill. It's maybe the most important skill a human being can develop, and nobody in the modern world is teaching it. In fact, the entire modern economy is designed to do the opposite. It's designed to make you need more. Every advertisement you see exists for one reason and one reason only: to take something you didn't know existed 5 minutes ago and make you feel like you can't live without it. In the hollow where I grew up, a man's wealth was not measured by what he owned. It was measured by what he didn't need. My Uncle Earl had the same pair of boots for 19 years. He resold them 4 times. He oiled them every Sunday night. And when people would say, "Earl, you need new boots," he'd look down at his feet and say, "What for? These ones still work." And he meant it. He wasn't performing simplicity. He wasn't making a statement. He genuinely could not understand why a person would replace something that still functioned. That mindset is almost extinct now. We live in a world where people throw away things that work perfectly fine because a newer version exists, where people feel shame about owning something old, where the entire culture tells you that your worth is connected to the newness of your possessions. And the result is that people are drowning in things they don't need, bought with money they don't have, to impress people they don't even like. My Uncle Earl would have found that absolutely insane, and he would have been right. I'll tell you a story about Earl that I think about almost every week. One winter, a traveling salesman came through the hollow selling cookware. Nice stuff, shiny copper pots, the kind of thing you'd see in a catalog from a city department store. And this salesman knocked on Earl's door and started his pitch. Told him about the superior heat distribution, the lifetime warranty, the easy monthly payments. And Earl listened patiently. He was a polite man. He let the man finish his whole speech. And when the salesman was done, Earl walked him into the kitchen and pointed at a cast-iron skillet hanging on the wall. He said, "You see that pan? That pan belonged to my great-grandmother. She cooked on it. My grandmother cooked on it. My mother cooked on it. My wife cooks on it now. It's 130 years old, and it works better today than the day it was made. Now you're asking me to buy something that comes with a lifetime warranty. That pan didn't need a warranty. It just needed someone to take care of it." The salesman left, and Earl went back to whatever he was doing like the conversation had never happened. That's what needing less looks like. It's not deprivation, it's clarity. It's knowing the difference between what serves you and what just takes up space in your life. The third thing nobody taught you is that most of the important things in life are boring. I mean that seriously. The things that actually hold a life together, the things that make a family work, the things that keep a community alive, they are not exciting. They are not dramatic. They will never go viral. They are boring. Showing up every day is boring. Doing the same chores every morning is boring. Checking on your neighbor when you'd rather stay home is boring. Putting food by in the summer so you can eat in the winter is boring. Fixing the fence before it falls down instead of after is boring. Keeping your word when it costs you something is boring. Being faithful to the same person for 50 years is boring. And I mean that as the highest compliment I can give. Because boring means consistent. Boring means reliable. Boring means still there when the exciting things have come and gone and left nothing behind. My grandparents were married for 53 years. Nobody ever made a movie about their marriage. Nobody ever would. Because most of their marriage was ordinary. It was coffee in the morning. It was working side by side in the garden. It was sitting on the porch in the evening, not saying much. It was one of them getting sick and the other one taking care of them without being asked. It was 1,000 small, ordinary acts of loyalty, repeated so many times they became invisible. And that invisibility is what made it strong. The things you see are not always the things that matter. The foundation of a house is underground. You never look at it. You never think about it. But it's the reason the house is still standing. My grandparents' marriage was like that. All foundation, no show. And it held up everything above it for half a century. The modern world teaches you to want the spectacular, the big gesture, the grand romance, the dramatic transformation, the overnight success. And those things do happen sometimes, but they are not what hold a life together. What holds a life together is the boring stuff, the daily stuff, the stuff nobody claps for. And if you can't find meaning in that, if you need every day to be exciting and new and different, you will never build anything that lasts. The mountains taught us that. Every season was the same cycle. Plant, tend, harvest, preserve, survive the winter, do it again. It was boring, and it was the most stable, grounded, meaningful way of life I have ever seen. The fourth thing nobody taught you is how to disagree with someone and still love them. In the hollow where I grew up, people disagreed about everything: politics, religion, how to raise children, how to butcher a hog, whether the creek bottom or the ridge top was better for planting corn. People had strong opinions, and they weren't shy about sharing them. I watched my father and my Uncle Raymond get into arguments that would rattle the windows. Red-faced, finger-pointing, voice-raising arguments about things that probably didn't matter as much as they thought they did. And then an hour later they'd be sitting on the porch together, sharing a jar of apple brandy like nothing happened. Because the argument didn't change the relationship. The relationship was bigger than the argument. They were brothers. They were blood. They were bound together by 1,000 shared experiences that no disagreement about corn planting could undo. I don't see that anymore. I see people today who end friendships over a single opinion, who cut off family members because they voted for the wrong person, who divide the entire world into people who agree with them and people who are the enemy. And I understand why it happens. When your identity is built around your beliefs, any challenge to those beliefs feels like a challenge to your existence. But that's the problem right there. Your beliefs are not your identity. They're just your beliefs. They can change. They should change, some of them, over time. The thing underneath the beliefs, the character, the loyalty, the willingness to show up for people even when you think they're wrong, that's your identity. And if you lose that because someone disagrees with you about politics, then you've traded something permanent for something temporary, and you'll regret it. My father and Uncle Raymond voted different in every election for 40 years. 40 years. And they never once let it come between them, because they both understood something that I think the modern world has completely lost. They understood that the person matters more than the position, that love is not agreement, that family is not a coalition of people who think the same way. It's a group of people who have decided to stay together, regardless. And that decision, that stubborn, irrational, sometimes infuriating decision to stay, that's the thing nobody taught you. Because the modern world taught you the opposite. It taught you to leave, to cut people off, to curate your circle, to surround yourself only with people who affirm you. And the result is that people have circles that are very comfortable and very small and very fragile. One crack and the whole thing shatters. The fifth thing nobody taught you is that your body knows things your mind doesn't. In these mountains, people trusted their bodies in a way that I don't think modern people do. If something felt wrong, it was wrong. If a place felt dangerous, it was dangerous. If a person made your skin crawl, you stayed away from that person. You didn't need to explain it. You didn't need to justify it with logic or evidence. Your body told you, and you listened. My grandmother called it the knowing. She said every person is born with the knowing, but most people spend their whole lives learning to ignore it. Schools teach you to ignore it because schools want you to think, not feel. Jobs teach you to ignore it because jobs want you to be rational and productive. And the whole modern world teaches you to ignore it because the modern world doesn't trust anything it can't measure. But your body has been keeping you alive for a lot longer than your mind has. Your body carries information that goes back thousands and thousands of years. It knows things about danger and safety and trust that your conscious mind hasn't caught up to yet. And when you override that knowledge, when you talk yourself out of what your gut is telling you because it doesn't make logical sense, you are ignoring the oldest and most reliable guidance system you have. I'm not saying don't think. I'm not saying logic doesn't matter. I'm saying that when your body and your mind disagree, don't automatically assume your mind is right. Sometimes your body is picking up on something your mind hasn't processed yet. The old people in these mountains knew that. They trusted it. And it kept them alive in situations where thinking alone would have gotten them killed. The sixth thing nobody taught you is that grief is not a problem to be solved. It's a place to be lived in for a while. When someone died in the hollow, the whole community stopped. Not for an hour, not for a day, for as long as it took. People came to the house. They brought food. They sat with the family. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't say a word. They just sat there, present, bearing witness to the pain, not trying to fix it. Not trying to make it better, not saying everything happens for a reason, or they're in a better place, or any of the other things people say when they're uncomfortable with someone else's grief and want it to stop. They just sat there and let the grief be what it was. Enormous, ugly, loud sometimes, silent sometimes. Whatever shape it needed to take, they let it take that shape. The modern world treats grief like an illness. something to recover from, something to get over, something to manage with stages and timelines and therapy appointments. And I'm not against therapy. If it helps you, do it. But the idea that grief is a process with a beginning and an end, that you're supposed to move through it and come out the other side and be okay, I think that idea has done a lot of damage. Because some grief doesn't end. Some grief just becomes part of you. It moves in like a tenant, and it never leaves. And the best you can do is learn to live in the same house with it. My mother lived with grief for 40 years after she lost her first child. She didn't get over it. She didn't move on. She carried it every single day. And she still lived a full life. She still laughed. She still loved. She still found joy in things. But the grief was always there, right next to the joy. And she made room for both, because that's what you do. You don't choose between them. You hold them both. Nobody taught you that. Nobody taught you that happiness and sadness can live in the same heart at the same time, and neither one cancels out the other. The seventh thing nobody taught you, and this is the last one, and I saved it for last because I think it's the one people need to hear the most. Nobody taught you that you are going to die. Now I know you know that intellectually. Everybody knows that. But knowing it in your head and knowing it in your bones are two completely different things. The people in these mountains knew it in their bones. Death was not an abstract concept. It was not something that happened to other people in hospitals far away. It was right there, in the house, in the hollow, in the churchyard where the stones go back to the 1700s, and the names on them are the same names as the people still living on the road. Death was a neighbor. You saw it regularly. You helped dig the graves. You washed the bodies. You sang the hymns. And because death was so present, so visible, so undeniably real, people lived differently. They didn't waste time on things that didn't matter, because they knew their time was short and precious and not guaranteed. My grandfather told me something when I was about 16 that I didn't understand until I was 40. He said, "Son, every morning you wake up, you've been given something you didn't earn and don't deserve. Another day." And most people take that gift and waste it worrying about things that won't matter in 5 years, or chasing things that won't make them happy when they get them. Don't be most people. Know that this day might be the last one you get. Not in a scary way, not in a morbid way, in a grateful way. Let the knowledge that you're going to die make you more alive. Let it make you kinder. Let it make you braver. Let it make you less willing to spend your one precious life doing things you hate and being around people who make you small. He was right, and it took me 24 years to understand how right he was. The modern world hides death. It pushes it into hospitals and funeral homes and insurance paperwork. It does everything possible to keep you from thinking about it, and the result is that people live as if they have forever. They put off the important things. They stay in situations that make them miserable because they think there's always more time. They don't say the things they need to say to the people they love because they think there will be another chance. And then one day, there isn't another chance, and the words they never said become the heaviest thing they've ever carried. I'm 60 years old. I've buried both my parents. I've buried friends and cousins and neighbors and one of my own children. And every single one of those losses taught me the same lesson. Don't wait. Whatever it is you need to say it now. Whatever it is you need to do it now. Whoever it is you need to love them now. Not tomorrow, not next week. Not when things calm down. Now. Because the mountains taught me something that the modern world tries very hard to make you forget. The only time you actually have is right now. This moment, this breath, this heartbeat. Everything else is a story you're telling yourself about a future that may never come. That's what nobody taught you. That's what these mountains taught me. And I hope at least one piece of it lands somewhere inside you where it can take root and grow. Because these truths are old, and they're simple, and they're not fancy. But they kept people alive and sane and connected and grateful for a very long time. And I think they can do the same for you if you let them.